All right, everyone, let's get started. My name is Sebastian Gruneit. I'm the procurement director for the service provider program here at AD. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for our webinar, The PO Problem Nobody Talks About: How Late Deliveries Drive Customer Churn. You will hear from our AD member, General Factory Supply, and our AD service provider, Leverage AI. But before we get into the housekeeping introduction, we want to highlight that this topic is clearly top of mind for our member community. We have seen record registration numbers today, so this is really incredible. All right, here are some of the housekeeping items. If you have questions today during the presentation, please use the Q&A button in the Zoom control panel in the bottom of your screen to submit your question. We will then address those at the end of the session. During the Q&A, but if there's any questions we don't have time to answer today, we will follow up with you individually. And we are really excited to present you with this webinar today, and I'm happy to introduce today's panel. From our AD member, we have George Cox, VP of Purchasing at General Factory Supply. And you will hear the inspiring story how George led the transition from a manual PO tracking to automated supplier communication. And from our service provider, Leverage AI, we have co-founder and head of sales, Andrew Struve. Andrew has helped businesses driving improvements in productivity, growth, and profitability. Okay, Andrew and George, please come on, and I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Perfect. Awesome. I'll wait for Josh to join as well, but otherwise excited to get going here. Uh, First off, Sebastian, thanks for the hosting and intro. I'm very excited to talk today with Josh Cox and generally with the Affiliate Distributors Network and Group. A lot of exciting things across the board here. And so, first off, just as context, I will just toot Josh Cox's and General Factory Supply's horn on 75 years of operations. Fantastic, exceptional. A lot of you probably as members already are familiar with General Factory Supply, but also if you want to learn more, you can always go to the website. But this is just some overview that you'll find, an amazing organization. And we, as Leverage AI, have been very fortunate and honored to have worked with them in the past and subsequently continue to do so and support their organization more broadly. Okay, perfect. So what we're covering is three, classic points that we'd love to get through. As you know, the title really is around how purchase orders have a direct impact to your customers and protecting against churn and the insights around that. So realistically, I think the best way to talk about this is sequentially in how this evolves and the opportunity that comes to be, how late deliveries lead to lost customers, what that means, and how do you put a number around that, and how Josh and I have talked about that extensively and aligned on how ultimately we address that issue with leverage. Spotting early warning signs from the purchasing data. So this is how you be proactive and thinking about how you stay ahead of a specific customer issue that may lead to churn. And then ultimately, just how do you simplify the PO management process generally and the impact it has on margin and retention. And so I think as we go through that, a couple of things. One, I know it's kind of weird to think about how purchase orders are related to customers, sales, and churn, but that's the entire point of elaborating on that and the conversations that Josh and I have talked through and the ROI and ultimately the workflows. And then just to make it a little fun as well, very fortunate to have affiliate distributors help us with some fun audience polling, which I know Sienna will be behind the scene working through as we go through as well. So if you're at your computers or even on your phone, you'll see little pop-ups on the voting for the polling come up as we talk through the conversation as well. Perfect. So going through this, I would love to maybe, Josh, dive in a little bit and chat on the front around how did we arrive to the discussion point, if you can recall, that late deliveries lead to lost customers. I know that there's these four bullet points here, but would love to think about in your mind, because you're actually the one who brought this up to us, and we kind of discovered this along the way, that process, and maybe we can dive into individual bullet points along the conversation thread.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think for us, what drove the conversation with leverage was when I got to the organization, oh, it's been over 5 years ago now, we really identified a problem with the amount of clutter that was in email boxes and customers not seeing, um, immediate acknowledgments with real delivery dates or real expected dates, and that kind of driving purchasing behavior from our customers. And so we were looking for a way to automate that whole process. So when we, from the time we cut the PO, getting responses back from our suppliers so that we could provide a more realistic timeline to our customers. Um, as you know, if you're in the purchasing field or the supply chain side, when you cut a PO and you're relying on an acknowledgement back via email and you don't realize that you didn't get an acknowledgement back soon enough, oftentimes, you may be a day or two behind a production schedule, and which leads to significant delays in getting product to your customers. So that's really what drove the conversation for us in leverage.
Well, but to give yourself credit, Josh, I mean, you guys almost 1,000 suppliers, like tens of thousands of POs, like it is a large feat. I mean, so I assume, like probably a lot of the other 80 members here, like this is also a volume scale problem, right? Like if you were, only had five suppliers and maybe a few POs, this wouldn't be an issue. But ultimately, based on where I think a lot of the 80 members are, this really is also just the fact that you have such a good building momentum of progress, but also that there's a lot of coverage and subsequently how you provide the coverage necessary to your customers on the supply chain side, right? Like that seems to be one of the core pieces of just this is not something that you can just throw bodies at, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So before engaging with leverage, we had an intern program as well as a larger purchasing department um, trying to handle the expediting process and the acknowledgement process for POs. And it just seemed like a vicious cycle, right? I mean, getting through all of that communication to find the pieces of data that are really relevant to what you need to do is challenging. And so with leverage, that's, obviously we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on, but that's not the case. And it allows us to really, you know, hone in on the things that really matter from a purchasing perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I have one more question on this specific slide, but to your point, I think a common theme that you are articulating that we've seen is the labor market's changed, right? And I think even like the generations of different types of people and their expectations and what they consider value add work or things they're doing. And so we see this a lot to your exact anecdote that doing non-value add work of comparing, two documents side by side and trying to keep track of them and do that at scale is a hard thing to both recruit for, train for, and retain. And that's also where this wave of conversations for tech and AI and everything else in between. The one question I actually did have for you before we move on to the slide here, Josh, is you know, you're the one who actually kind of dinged the light bulb for us, if you will, around the customer retention and protecting churn question that came up because that was such a top of mind thought for you and the team. And so would love to, obviously there's like some numbers on here on ranges and costs for a PO line and those pieces, but realistically, I'm curious, how did that kind of connecting the dots really became obvious for you, which may not always be as obvious for maybe some of the other people or team members or people in the industry?
Yeah, so when I took over purchasing for General Factory Supply, I surveyed customers to understand kind of what the pain points were within the organization. I mean, we're a product-driven business, right? And so what I heard from customers often was we don't know when our product's coming, or we don't get enough communication about when to expect the product that we buy from you, or we've been told a delivery date and then subsequently we get it 3, 5, 7 days later, and we plan, shutdowns and projects around those times. And what we learned from doing that research is that, you know, if you have a fantastic relationship, you'll get a few opportunities where you may miss a delivery window or miss a timeline. But at the end of the day, they have a business to run. And so as that those, instances compound. And by the second or third instance of missing a delivery window, the customer is now looking at other options within the distribution world to service them. And so it's a service failure, right? So even though we're this product business, it's a service failure if you can't get it to them when they need it and when it's valuable for them, right? And so most of those failures on our side were related to the the inability to manage the communication coming back from the suppliers, all the PDF acknowledgments that you get, all of the adjusted timelines and ASNs that come in, um, and finding a way to manage those without having to, scale your headcount and increase your operating costs. It was necessary, and that's what drove it.
Love that. It's great, and like I said, I love, first principles, product minded, talking to the customers. It goes a long way. Well, as we transition, I know Sienna's gonna do the Zoom perfect poll and quiz. We have a couple of these along the way. The first one is a very simple question. Has your company lost a customer in the past year due to a deliver issue? Is this something, especially in the world of tariffs, the transportation logistics challenges globally based on different conflicts? Curious what that is. I thought that was an interesting question because I think that, even say like pre-COVID, this is a different type of shape of answer. And now we're in a different world in that category. I'll give a few more seconds to respond to this one, and then we actually have one right after it as well. But I think that in the landscape of what we've seen between a yes, definitely to a no, and not sure, it's a very fascinating. Yep, definitely fascinating. I'm like just looking at the results right now. And so this is, I think, ultimately where we have a very impactful conversation and how we think about supporting our customer base. Okay, next one, very simple. How many emails per day does your purchasing team ultimately handle and related to POs? I'm sure this is often very much driven by the amount of POs that you're cutting and the type of work and suppliers that you have. But I would imagine it's more than you think, even. And sometimes our customers have it very quickly on their fingertips. Sometimes it's even an open-ended question. So I'll wait for these responses to come in as well. Yeah, makes sense. A lot of a per day amount. There's, depending on your team distribution there, from 50 to 300, it's not a small amount. And that's just for a given day. And so this is where I think we've seen a lot of value for distributors and excited to talk through. Well, so transitioning from there, and before we get into even more of the third or fourth question on the quiz, I think the biggest thing that we have tried to focus on and work with Josh, and we'll dive more into this as well, is like really thinking about spotting early warning signs when it comes to purchasing data. There's obviously, to what we just talked about, the inbox chaos, and then ultimately thinking about how we work through exception-based management, and the speed to respond to exceptions. But ultimately, I'm curious, maybe Josh, if you want to like dive into this a little bit, just thinking about when you thought about the holistic system when it comes to automation, inbox volume, like you talked about, exception-based escalation, and and maybe we even talk a little bit around all that data, because I know we talk about this a lot on the side, that leads to supplier performance and understanding what on time and in full looks like now that you have that data. Maybe would love to chat a little bit that from your perspective, how you tier that in priority.
Yeah, I mean, I think as everyone knows, as we're cutting these purchase orders, right, and there's this influx of data that's coming back from the suppliers into the email boxes, and your buyers are, translating that data back into your ERP in various fields. One thing that tends to get lost, even with a really good BI tool, at your fingertips, is how successful is the process working, right? Are we getting the POs to the suppliers accurately? Are they getting the acknowledgments back to us accurately? right? That's that kind of inbox reduction piece. And there's a lot of clutter in there. There's a lot of data that comes back that doesn't bring value back to the process, just part of the acknowledgement. And your buyers, if we're doing this manually, are having to sift through that information, right? And that slows down the next piece, which is probably one of the more important pieces, which is this exception-based management. Because really what we're looking for on those acknowledgments is, are we going to get it in the timeline that we told the customer we would get it? Because we've sold the product, right? If we're ordering it, a lot of times we've sold it, or there's a replenishment cycle that dictates that we get it back in for a customer purchase, right? Are we going to get it on time? Is our pricing correct? And we're sifting through lines and lines of POs to validate information where, generally speaking, if we have good processes, that information's accurate, right? We don't need to look through all that data. So what leverage has allowed us to do, and I think is, probably one of the biggest lifts that we've seen is on those larger line POs, we only see the exceptions. And those are the things that we need to focus on. And so it reduces, a significant amount of time for our buyers not having to sift through all that data that, doesn't really bring value back to the supply chain process.
Yeah,
And that's
okay,
and that's
sorry,
where you
Josh.
find, sorry, Andrew, that's where you find those early warning signs also, right? So if you start to see that your pricing is out of line with a supplier, you start to see that exceptions are going up and there's exception reporting within the portal, and you can see those things. Now you have real tangible conversations as leaders over those areas, over the purchasing area, and even over our sales team looks at it as well, to go back to your team internally and find out if it's an internal issue or if it's an external issue, and have productive conversations to resolve those problems sooner.
Yeah, 100%. And I was actually just going to chime in there that I think the thing that we've observed, and especially working with you, is the speed to action in that category, which is that last piece of it, is impactful because it impacts how not just the fact that you're aware of the problem, which is what you described, but also exactly what you talked about. How do you take remediation action in a time frame that actually can solve the problem, whether it might be reaching out to the customer, might find an alternative replacement part. And I think that's the question that we often help answer, is that, yes, you can get to this, but it might be a 2-day, week-long process, and that isn't necessarily the timetable that customers or the rest of the organization operates on. Great. Well, I would love to go to the next question and poll, which is, how does your purchasing team currently track PO status with suppliers? I think this is the fundamental question that we get to, and as we're talking about, there's other ways, a better way, if you will, what that would look like. But often baseline, which, as you can imagine, whether it's like manual via email, spreadsheets, ERP built-in tools, an existing PO automation platform, we see a wide spectrum, and often we work with different systems and even work in tandem with, or often can help support things like EDI, but very curious what the response will be. Yeah. So actually, I have no idea if you guys can see the results and polls as well, but I will say that this is not surprising that what Josh has described of where they were in a world of managing emails and where I think we see a lot of our customers come from. It's a very classic, 30 years ago when you had 5 or 10 vendors or suppliers, this was a much easier process, but that doesn't scale with headcount and is very much a manual process, and typically with email. And even knowing that within the ERP built-in tools, it doesn't have the same way of following up, asking for open order reports, shipment information, seeing the back end, escalating with exceptions for quick review. And so we often try to find, and we have a running joke, which I know Josh appreciates, is that every ERP is the same, but they're all different. Every purchasing process is the same, but they're all different. And we very much care for, and Josh, we can talk about this a little later, but like we really try to be partners with our customers because of that very specific reason in that process. Perfect. Well, I would love to talk about impact margins efficiency and team retention. Um, I think that the thing that Josh, maybe the question for you is when you thought about the value and outside of just like the pure protecting customer retention, it's how do you think about the broader sweep of things, whether it's downstream to shipments and receiving and drop shipping and invoices to the upstream keeping item records updated and the customer, protecting the churn. But obviously there's all of these pieces that happen when it comes to margin improvement, buyer turnover, inbox reduction. I would love to hear your perspective on this because I think it's very valuable for the audience.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that I guess has been eye-opening for me over the time that we've kind of worked together is when we initially went into this project, we had a fairly lean team and not enough capacity to continue to scale, right? And so this was a how do we continue to scale and service our customer at a high level play for us. And what we learned once we got on leverage was we had challenges in other areas of our business that weren't evident, right? You know, and like pricing is one that comes to mind. So we talk about how do we get 6 to 8% margin improvement. Well, we get there with the visibility that leverage gives us in understanding where we have those variances and where those discrepancies are coming from, PO to acknowledgement of PO. And then we can go back and have productive conversations with our teams. We've improved internal pricing, price update processes internally. We've worked obviously with Andrew on some other things around pricing as well, for us specifically, and that's where you gain that margin improvement, right? And then the other side of it is as you have turnover in your purchasing team, your mistakes tend to go up, right? So when that new person comes on, there's a ramp up period and there's challenges with that process. And so that leads to margin bleed as well. And so if you can limit turnover, you're going to gain margin back by limiting the mistakes, right? And then the inbox reduction is the thing that, people, take for granted. We're all in our emails and we're all inundated with emails and we all just kind of go about our day to day, right? And we grind through it and we do the best we can. But then when you look at repurposing that time that you get back when you don't have to spend 50% of your time going through emails for non-value added things, now I can leverage that team member to go have more meaningful conversations and build more robust relationships with suppliers, which then allows you to drive real margin improvement, right? If you've got great relationships with your suppliers today, but there's communication challenges because everything's done manually on both sides, this is just going to lift the relationship even higher. It's going to be easier to do business with you, easier to do business with the supplier, and that tends to lead to more product being moved at higher margins.
Absolutely. There's one more question on the slide before we get to the final quiz question, which I'd love to ask you, Josh, because I know, and it's a leading question, but I know that it's true. Curious now that you have, let's talk about post leverage. You have the workflows, it's automated, asking suppliers for acknowledgments and updates, shipment information. You see exceptions. You have this data flowing back to your ERP, P21, and now you have supplier performance data. Would love to talk about that impact as well when it comes to on time and in full and how you think about having a different type of conversation now that you can actually point towards change requests and response times and delivery and on-time performance. That's, I think, a huge, interesting unlock I also would love to hear your thoughts on.
Yeah. So when you're having constructive conversations with your suppliers, right? And it's subjective, right? You're having a constructive conversation with anyone, it's always subjective. It's your side and their side. And when there's no real tangible data, no real easy way to access that data in real time to have a tough conversation with a supplier, it falls on deaf ears. So you're having the conversation, but you're not getting any traction and any solutioning around what the real problem is. What leverage allowed us to do with our supplier scorecard is we like when we have our meetings both in-house and when we go to the North American meeting and have our meetings at AD, I bring my tablet, I pull it up real time. I can show them the dashboard of where they are and how they perform. And then if we can get granular. If they say, well, help us understand where we're missing, what POs or what items are we struggling with, I can drill right into it right within leverage. I can see the item level detail. I can see the PO level detail. Um, I can see which POs drive the the number down or up, right? It's been huge because our suppliers are more responsive. Because when you're sitting down with a high level leader within a supplier or manufacturer, if you have that real data to show them in real time, it's undeniable, right? And so it's helped us tremendously.
Love that. Yeah, I remember the first time we were at a conference together, and I was like, Josh, what are you doing? And you're walking around with this tablet, and I was like, this is fantastic and amazing, because we always love to hear about how you kind of turn that qualitative, let's talk about constructive conversation, maybe a survey to feel about how we're doing on a quarterly basis, versus here's some data to help back it up, which doesn't have to require, weeks, days, whatever it may be to produce, but you have it on at your fingertips. Perfect. Well, let's go through the last poll. What is your biggest challenge with supplier communication today? I'm curious what that might be, but with this and everything we've talked about, and perhaps a very quick, brief moment to reflect a little bit on what those may be. These things are often things that we hear and things that we're discussing here with Josh, but always love to get a pulse, especially from a community like the Affiliate Distributors group. Well, unsurprisingly, the answer seems to be all of the above. Is a massive angle there. I think anecdotally, very quickly, I would say that sometimes, depending on how you operate, once again, every purchase organization and process is different. They're the same, but they're all different. Is that you may care a little less about tracking or exceptions, or even ETAs, but often, like the poll suggests, it is a lot of just everyone, and everything about that. Well, I'll quickly do the rundown, and then we'll flip to a Q&A for Josh and I to field whatever questions may come to mind. High level, what I hope, and Josh subsequently, that you walk away with is that late deliveries have a direct correlation to churn and how it impacts that, especially in a distributor business when it comes to delivering value consistently, quickly, and efficiently to the customers. There is warning signs in your data, which we're always happy to talk about how you can identify those, at least as a starting point, and that's also part of how we think about ROI. And the last thing that I think any leader that we've seen has always articulated to us is that the worst case scenario is that all this information and context is stuck in these inboxes and a manual process that they can't get out to be able to make smart, informed decisions. We find that very impactful because when we think about whether it's downstream reducing through matching to upstream impacting margin improvements and a direct tie to that is a huge value add. And we've been tracking this for a long time, being in business for a while as well. And ultimately, in the business that you are all in, Josh is in when it comes to general factory supply, purchasing is part of the business. And getting it right protects the business and makes it part of a foundational anchor point pillar for success, which is why we love working with the independent distributors like Affiliate Distributors Network. I'll pause there. Josh and I are at your disposal when it comes to asking questions or anything else. I know Sebastian will be fielding those, and so excited to field them along the way.
No, awesome. Yeah, that was a good conversation, and we definitely have quite a bit of questions coming in today. So everybody's using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which is perfect. So we're likely not able to address all the questions today, but do not worry. Like following the webinar, and we're gonna prepare a follow-up communication, and also Andrew and team will follow up with everyone individually on any open questions. So I'm gonna start with a few questions I see here, and then we're gonna navigate from there. So I think one of the questions I saw now popping up is, okay, maybe it's for Josh, like what does the onboarding and transition learning curve look like from your perspective? Like the time invested from a team perspective, was there any resistance on the team during this process? So maybe you can share a little bit more there, Josh.
Yeah, so I would say the onboarding was not terribly difficult. So, depending on, I mean, there's a number of ways that leverage works, and so it's um, different pathways to get that same information and get it sourced and put into the correct places within the ERP. Um, we had a phased approach with ours because we were trying to address a number of things within the purchasing department at the time. But, I would say within that probably 60 to 90 day window, we had a substantial amount of suppliers online. The lift was not exceptional from an internal lift from a tech stack perspective. The adoption was a little more challenging. Uh, Mostly with new folks. We had turned over almost the entire purchasing department about the same time. So if you have a seasoned purchasing department, I can tell you that they're going to love it because it's going to reduce the workload tremendously. Um,
Mhm.
Folks that are coming in new and trying to learn new tech at the same time, it was a little bit challenging for us. So that was one thing that we faced. Um, but yeah, I think total implementation, I consider us probably 100% online within the first 4 to 5 months. And that's all suppliers that we buy from. And what we used to gauge that was we said if we buy from these suppliers more than twice a month, we want them
Mhm.
online and actively using leverage for communication. And so within that 4 to 5 month window, we were 100% online.
And how many suppliers do you have again, Josh? Like how many were in the you considered?
Well, that's the other thing that's interesting. So we were significantly higher on suppliers than we are today. When we started that process, we were, probably 850 to 1,000 suppliers roughly.
Okay.
We're down to about 300, 325 because the data has allowed us to, you get item level
Mhm.
data and all sorts of things within the leverage platform that's going to give you visibility to, right? That we didn't dive into today. So that has helped us really consolidate um,
Mhm.
and be able to target AD suppliers even more than we were able to do before. So it's been a significant tool for us.
Oh, great. Good to hear. And maybe the next question, I make a combination of two questions I see, and those are maybe for you, Andrew, around like EDI is a connection to supplier partners, but also then a second question which goes along, how do you handle suppliers who don't want to utilize a specific portal or access
Mm.
point, like those type. So maybe you can give a little bit more feedback, like how leverage approaches this or might not even be in a situation where you have to worry about those things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Sebastian, and they're ones that we hear often. I think the thing that we've seen, and I'm sure whoever may have asked the question have had experience dealing with EDI, it can be a very painful process. Oftentimes, talking about two trade partners around specific documents and setting up that relationship, the configuration, maintaining it. We often will have, especially for our larger customers, enterprise customers, they'll have three, four of their suppliers or key suppliers with an EDI connection because they've chosen based on the frequency and the collaboration and the IT capabilities on both sides that made sense. The challenge is that that's three out of their 400 or 500 suppliers, and the rest of them won't or don't and or have the plan to capability budget to support that EDI rollout. And so it's often a very much open-ended question of like yes, and to an EDI perhaps rollout for two or three suppliers, which we can also help support, but oftentimes you say like leave it alone, and if it's not broken, don't fix it. How we think about the rest of the tail, which often is very large. And I think the broader question to the supplier portal is like that's actually part of the secret sauce for us is that there is a portal that a supplier can log into and observe and use and engage with, very similar to the experience that a customer like General Factory Supply will see. But the reality is that we often will never be known to be a supplier portal for the supplier because we actually will just send the PO, the PDF in an email just like they did before, just from the same domain and person that they saw before, but with a very easy button to take action and or provide a response and escalate it around changes. And so this idea of not having to have a supplier portal and being a place that you don't need one, that they're in their inbox, which is where they already live, and even be able to parse, which is the other part of this, responses like PDFs, Excel files, templated HTML responses in an email that Leverage can pick up and process on behalf of that virtual buyer is very impactful, because that basically the core fundamental is don't change their behavior patterns. Keep it the same. They're in their inbox. They send out automated emails. They have automated attachments or an automated email response. Well, we'll take care of that. And I think that's part of where we really partner with our customers to figure out what that means in that right mix, because we don't want to disrupt the process. We want to be additive and help expand and enhance that capability.
All right, that's good to know. So basically, there's the option if they want to, if you have a supplier, there is one, but there's no specific need because they just, if I understood correctly, they just continue business as usual for them, like
Absolutely.
communicated, and then okay.
Yeah, Sebastian, it's funny because I know Josh and I've talked about this as well. It's like I love our customers. I love Josh and I love General Factory Supply. We love our users in that side of it. But the real metric and the value that we're held accountable to is, yes, making sure that they can see the platform and exception, but it's actually making sure that all suppliers use the platform. Because if they don't use the tool or provide us the data, there is no value, because that's the data that we're looking for and be able to consolidate around.
Right.
Okay. And another question came up, and maybe we can work on this in the follow-up. There were questions around if there could be examples of like how a dashboard looks like or anything like this. So maybe in the follow-up or like a little bit after, we can maybe come up with a little bit of a dashboard overview and just give some idea like how this looks. And of course, getting in touch with you to have like a one-on-one session on a demo, talking through what the solution can do and how it addresses certain other pain points. So I think we still have a couple more minutes. So I'm going to see what other questions we got in here and we can address live. Or a good question, like from a language perspective, is it available? Is the solution available in different languages as of today? Like for example, in this question, like is it available in Spanish?
Yeah, it is, but we often will find that the browser will do the auto conversion anyways, because we're already in the inbox and it's a quick within a browser environment. The browsers that our customers and suppliers use automatically convert it over, and our platform itself supports that and helps make sure that that triggers and is enabling the capability. So, we have tens of thousands, I think almost hundreds of thousands of suppliers in network around the globe using this 24/7. And that's the way that we reach that scale.
Okay, good. I think we covered a good amount, so just we have a few more minutes. Like George, Andrew, anything else you wanna highlight, you wanna touch on as a final say in the webinar?
I want to give Josh the final word. He's the man here.
Well, what I would say is this. I know anytime you're evaluating these tools, and we certainly do this, we're going through a lot of digital transition within our organization today. You know, certainly reach out to me. I'd be glad to talk through it in more depth, and kind of show you the things that I can without divulging too much competitive information. But the leverage team has always been fantastic. I mean, I was just on a call with those guys last week, Andrew's engineers and team, around some customizations and some things that I would like to see, and proof of concept, and seeing screenshots and dashboards and their demo environment speaks for itself. So certainly give Andrew's team the opportunity to do a demo for you, and if you want some more specifics, reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk through it. I'll be the first one. I've told Andrew this. I'll be the first one to tell you that there's a fit component to any tool that you select within your organization and where you want to go. I'd be glad to talk through those things as well. But our experience with leverage has been one that is kind of unparalleled compared to any of our other partners, even some of our other AD partners that are service providers. They really are here to try to adapt and make this tool as functional as it can be. And their supplier network, you're going to be shocked at how many suppliers they have on board that'll use the tool because that it started really on that side of the business, to be transparent, or at least my vision of it and what I think it has transitioned to over the years. And the distribution side was secondary, adapted to its secondary, right? So the supplier side is not where you're going to meet a lot of the resistance. Um, it's just finding out if the tool makes sense for you, really.
Right. Again, so we want to wrap up here to so everybody can go on to the next meeting. But a huge thank you to you, Josh and Andrew, for the presentation. Thanks for everyone who joined the webinar. Really great and audience. And if you want to revisit anything what we talked about today, as mentioned, we're going to prepare a follow-up communication which goes out shortly. And always feel free to reach out to us or Josh, thank you for that. And to Andrew, of course, if you want to learn more about and have your learn more about solution, have your personal one-on-one session on a demo. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.